I worked as a funeral director for nearly a decade, and in that time I handled thousands of bodies without ever questioning what I was told about how they died. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe the dead can speak, and I've never believed that fear belongs in a preparation room. But the case I'm about to describe broke a rule so fundamental to funeral service that I still don't know how I convinced myself to keep working afterward. At the time, I told myself it was an anomaly, a one-off mistake that could be explained if I just followed protocol and didn't ask questions. That lie lasted exactly 3 days. I started at Halverson & Sons in 2012, fresh out of mortuary school and grateful for the work. Richard Halverson had been running the funeral home for over 40 years. He knew every family in the county, attended every church function, served on the hospital board. When you worked for Richard, you inherited that trust. Families would walk through our doors in the worst moments of their lives and hand us their grief without hesitation. That trust was sacred. I believed that completely. The work itself was methodical, structured, predictable. Intake documentation, refrigeration protocols, embalming procedures, cosmetology, service coordination. Every step had a checklist. Every checklist had a reason. Routine wasn't boring. It was what kept grief from becoming chaos. I took pride in that. I never cut corners. I never rushed. And I never, in 11 years, allowed a body to leave our facility without complete and accurate documentation. Until Eleanor Price. She came to us on a Thursday evening in late October. 81 years old, cause of death listed as natural causes, cardiac arrest in her sleep. Her daughter Laura had found her that morning. The intake paperwork came from Dr. Marlene Kessler, the county coroner, which meant everything should have been straightforward. Dr. Kessler didn't make mistakes. Her reports were thorough, clinical, final. I received Mrs. Price from the transport service around 6 p.m. Stephen Boyd, our embalmer, had already gone home for the day, so I handled the intake myself. Standard procedure, verify identification, check the body against the documentation, note any jewelry or personal effects, refrigerate until prep. I unzipped the body bag in the prep room. Mrs. Price looked like she should have looked, elderly, thin, pale. But when I began the visual examination, I noticed something that didn't align with the paperwork. There were ligature marks on her wrists, faint but present, not fresh. They'd been there at least several hours before death. The skin showed the characteristic pattern of restraint, circumferential abrasions, slight bruising in the deeper tissue. I checked the coroner's report again. No mention of restraints, no mention of abrasions. Cause of death, natural cardiac arrest. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those marks. There are explanations for this sort of thing. Medical restraints in a hospital setting, fall prevention straps in a nursing home. She was elderly. Maybe she'd been confused, combative, needed temporary restraint for her own safety. It happens. But those details belong in the documentation. Dr. Kessler knew that. She was meticulous. I made a note in our internal log and called Dr. Kessler's office. It was after hours, so I left a message. Daniel Calder at Halverson & Sons, calling regarding Eleanor Price, case number 10-2447. I'm noting some minor discrepancies in the external exam that may need clarification before we proceed with preparation. Please call back at your earliest convenience. She called back 20 minutes later. Mr. Calder, her voice was clipped, professional. What discrepancies? There are ligature marks on Mrs. Price's wrists. They're not mentioned in your report. A pause, then. Mrs. Price was found in her bed at home. There were no restraints involved. I understand that, but the marks are present. They're consistent with... Mr. Calder, I performed the examination myself. The cause of death is cardiac arrest. There is nothing in this case that requires further investigation. I'm not suggesting investigation. I'm just noting that the physical condition doesn't fully align with... Are you questioning my professional assessment? I hesitated. No, I'm documenting what I'm observing. Then document it in your internal notes and proceed with preparation. The family is expecting services on Saturday. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. She hung up. I stood in the prep room holding the phone, staring at Eleanor Price's body on the table. The ligature marks were still there. They hadn't changed, but Dr. Kessler had been the county coroner for 18 years. She'd handled thousands of cases. If she said the marks were irrelevant, then they were irrelevant. I made my notes and proceeded with preparation. The viewing was on Friday evening. Laura Price came early, before the other family members arrived. She was in her late 50s, composed, dressed in dark gray. She stood at the casket for a long time, not crying, just looking at her mother's face. I approached quietly. I'm very sorry for your loss, Ms. Price. She nodded without looking at me. She looks peaceful. We did our best to honor her. Did you see her wrists? I went very still. Laura turned to look at me directly. When you received her, did you see her wrists? Yes, I said carefully. And? There were some marks. I noted them in our records. Did you ask anyone about them? I spoke with Dr. Kessler. She indicated they weren't relevant to the cause of death. Laura looked back at her mother. My mother was terrified of restraints. When my father was in the hospital before he died, she made me promise I'd never let them tie her down. She said she'd rather die confused than die trapped. I didn't know what to say. She was afraid of something, Laura said quietly. In the last few weeks, she wouldn't tell me what. She kept saying she was fine, but she wasn't sleeping. She started locking her bedroom door at night. I asked if someone had been bothering her, but she just smiled and said she was being silly. Laura's voice was steady, controlled. And then I found her, in her bed, with her wrists bruised. Miss Price, I know what you're going to say, that Dr. Kessler ruled it natural causes, that there's no evidence of anything suspicious, that my mother was 81 and her heart gave out. She looked at me again. But you saw the marks, so you know something wasn't right. I don't know anything, I said, but you noticed. I didn't answer. Laura reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. That's my number. If you ever need to talk about what you noticed, call me. I took the paper. She walked away before I could respond. I should have thrown the paper away. I should have forgotten the conversation. But I didn't. I put it in my wallet and went back to work. 3 weeks later, Michael Rowan came in, 54 years old, cause of death, listed as sudden cardiac event. Found at home by a neighbor. Dr. Kessler signed the report. Everything looked routine. Stephen Boyd was prepping the body when I came into the embalming room the next morning. He was working quietly, efficiently, the way he always did. I approached the table to verify the identification before we proceeded. That's when I saw Michael Rowan's wrists, the same marks, circumferential abrasions, slight bruising in the deeper tissue, consistent with restraint. I looked at Stephen. Did you notice these? He didn't look up from his work. Notice what? The ligature marks on his wrists. Didn't see any marks. Stephen, look at his wrists. He glanced at them briefly, then back to his instruments. I see some minor skin discoloration, probably from lividity. Nothing unusual. That's not lividity. Those are restraint marks. Stephen set down his scalpel and looked at me directly. Thomas, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what lividity looks like, and I know what my job is. My job is to prepare the body according to the family's wishes and make sure everything is ready for the service. That's it. I don't make diagnoses. I don't investigate causes of death. I follow the coroner's report and I do my job. He picked up the scalpel again. You should do the same. I left the embalming room and went to Richard's office. Richard Halverson was at his desk, reviewing service schedules. He looked up when I knocked. Thomas, come in. I closed the door behind me. Richard, I need to talk to you about a case. Which one? Michael Rowan, the intake from yesterday. Natural causes, sudden cardiac event. What about it? There are marks on his wrists, restraint marks, the same marks I saw on Eleanor Price 3 weeks ago. Richard set down his pen. And they're not mentioned in either coroner's report. Dr. Kessler signed both cases as natural causes, but the physical evidence doesn't support that. Richard leaned back in his chair. Thomas, do you know how many bodies come through this facility in a year? Around 200. 237 last year. And do you know how many of those bodies have some kind of mark, bruise, abrasion, or injury that isn't specifically mentioned in the coroner's report? I don't. Most of them. Because the coroner's job isn't to document every minor detail. It's to determine cause of death. If Dr. Kessler says natural causes, then it's natural causes. End of discussion. But these aren't minor details. These are restraint marks on 2 different people in cases 3 weeks apart. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Thomas, how long have you been working here? 11 years. 11 years. And in that time, have I ever given you a reason not to trust my judgment? No. Have I ever asked you to do anything unethical, illegal, or harmful to a family? No. Then I need you to trust me now when I tell you that you are overthinking this. You're seeing patterns where there are none. You're creating problems that don't exist. He turned to face me. And if you keep pushing this, you're going to damage relationships that this business depends on. Dr. Kessler is a professional. The county depends on her. We depend on her. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand. Good. Then let's close this conversation and get back to work. I left his office and went back to my desk, but I didn't close the conversation, not in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eleanor Price and Michael Rowan, about the marks on their wrists, about Laura Price saying her mother was terrified in the weeks before she died, about Richard telling me to stop asking questions. I got up around 2 a.m. and drove to the funeral home. I told myself I was going to review the intake logs, check the documentation, make sure I hadn't missed something obvious. But when I unlocked the back door and stepped into the hallway, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't there to review paperwork. I was there because something was wrong, and I needed to see it clearly. The building was silent. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. I walked down the hallway toward the prep room, and that's when I noticed the light was already on. I stopped. The prep room light should not have been on. Stephen had left hours ago. Richard had left before him. I was the only one in the building. I approached the prep room slowly. The door was partially open. I could see the edge of the examination table, the steel instruments gleaming under the overhead light. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. No one was there. But the refrigeration unit door was open. Not fully open, just ajar about 6 inches. Cold air was spilling out into the room. I crossed to the unit and pulled the door open fully. Michael Rowan's body was still there, on the lower tray. But his position had changed. His arms were no longer at his sides. They were raised slightly, bent at the elbows, as if someone had been examining his wrists. I stood there, staring at him, my heart pounding. Then I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I turned quickly, stepping out of the refrigeration unit. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving toward the prep room. I looked around for something to use as a weapon, but there was nothing, just surgical instruments. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I waited. Nothing. Then the sound of a door closing somewhere else in the building. The back door, the same one I'd used to enter. I moved quickly into the hallway. It was empty. I walked to the back door and checked the lock. It was still engaged from the inside. Whoever had been here had left, or they wanted me to think they had left. I returned to the prep room and checked the refrigeration unit again. Michael Rowan's body was in the same position, arms raised slightly, bent at the elbows. I closed the unit door, turned off the light, and left the building. The next morning, I called Laura Price. She answered on the second ring. "Hello, Miss Price, this is Thomas Calder from Halverson and Sons. You told me to call if I needed to talk." "I remember. I need to talk." We met at a diner 30 miles outside the county. Laura arrived 10 minutes after I did, carrying a folder. She sat down across from me and set the folder on the table. "My mother wasn't the first," she said. I looked at the folder. "What is that?" "Death certificates. I've been collecting them for 6 months. 11 cases, all ruled natural causes, all signed by Dr. Kessler, all involving elderly or vulnerable adults who died alone at home." "How did you get these?" "Public records. Anyone can request them." She opened the folder and spread the certificates across the table. I started looking after my mother died because I couldn't let it go. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop, because the pattern is obvious. Every one of these people was found at home. Every one of them died of sudden cardiac arrest or natural causes. And every single family I contacted said the same thing. Their loved one had been afraid in the weeks before they died. I stared at the certificates. 11 cases, 11 names I didn't recognize. "Did any of them have marks?" I asked. "I don't know. I didn't see the bodies. You did." "Not all of them, only 2. "How many came through your funeral home?" I looked at the names again. 3 of them were familiar. 3, maybe 4. "Then there are others, other funeral homes, other embalmers, who saw the same thing you did and decided not to ask questions." I pushed the certificates back toward her. "I can't do anything with this. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you so you know you're not crazy, so you know what you saw was real." "What do you think is happening?" Laura was quiet for a long moment. "I think someone is killing people, slowly, quietly, in a way that looks natural, and I think Dr. Kessler knows. Whether she's involved or just protecting someone, I don't know. But she's the reason these cases never get investigated. And Richard, I think your boss is protecting his business. That's all. He's not evil. He's just practical." I looked at her. "So what do I do?" "You survive," Laura said. "You stop asking questions. You keep your head down. And when you can't stand it anymore, you leave." "That's it?" "That's it. Because if you try to fight this, you'll lose. Not because you're wrong, because the system protects itself." She gathered the certificates and put them back in the folder. "I tried going to the sheriff. I tried going to the state medical board. No one wants to hear it. Dr. Kessler is respected, Richard Halverson is respected, and I'm just a grieving daughter who can't accept that her mother died of old age. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just stay alive. She left the diner before I did. I went back to work the next day. I didn't mention the conversation. I didn't mention the prep room. I didn't mention the certificates. I did my job. I followed procedure. I kept my head down, but I couldn't stop noticing. Over the next 2 months, 4 more bodies came through Halverson and Sons with the same marks, same cause of death, same coroner, same pattern. I documented every one of them in a separate notebook I kept in my car. I didn't know what I was going to do with the documentation. I just knew I needed to record it. Because if I didn't, I'd convince myself I'd imagined it. In early January, Richard called me into his office. "Thomas, sit down." I sat. He looked at me for a long moment. "I'm letting you go." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because you're not happy here anymore. And when people aren't happy, they make mistakes. I can't afford mistakes." "I haven't made any mistakes." "Not yet. But you will, because you're distracted. You're obsessing over things that aren't your responsibility. And that's dangerous in our line of work." "Richard, I'll give you 2 weeks severance. I'll provide a reference, but I need you to leave quietly. No drama, no accusations, no conversations with families or staff about why you're leaving, just a clean exit. Can you do that?" I looked at him. His face was calm, composed. There was no anger there, just certainty. "Yes," I said. "Good. Finish out the week. Then you're done." I finished out the week. I didn't tell anyone why I was leaving. I didn't mention the cases. I didn't mention the marks. I packed my desk, said my goodbyes, and left. I never went back. It's been 3 years. I don't work in funeral service anymore. I got a job in hospital administration, less contact with the dead, more distance from the questions I couldn't answer. I still have the notebook. I still have Laura Price's number. I've thought about calling her, but I don't know what I'd say. The dead don't speak with voices. They don't haunt buildings or move objects or send messages from the other side. They speak through patterns, through violations, through the small, quiet details that don't belong. And they speak through the people who are willing to notice. I noticed, that's all. I noticed and I documented and I survived. Some nights I wonder if that's enough. Most nights I know it isn't, but I'm still here, still alive, still carrying the weight of what I saw and didn't stop. That's not supernatural. That's not a ghost story. That's just what happens when good people decide that survival is more important than truth. I don't blame them. I'm one of them.